At exactly 3:17 a.m., I woke to the blaring screech of an alarm and the unmistakable sound of tires skidding across pavement. My bedroom walls lit up in pulses of blue and red, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Heart hammering in my chest, I stumbled to the window, only to witness what looked like the start of a Hollywood takedown. Armed agents moved with purpose, shouting into radios, their weapons drawn, storming the quiet cul-de-sac of Pinebrook Meadows. But that wasn't what stopped me cold. What stopped me, what nearly made me collapse, was the gaping emptiness in front of my house. My Humvee-style SUV, dark green, armored, locked, and parked exactly where the Federal Surveillance Division told me to keep it, was gone. In its place stood a bright orange cone and a neon pink sticky note fluttering in the wind. Code violation, HOA confiscated. I blinked, laughed maybe, then felt the blood drain from my face. Cheryl Whitmore, 56, self-proclaimed commander of the Pinebrook Meadows HOA, had just towed away a federal surveillance vehicle, like it was an abandoned couch. The implications hit all at once. A months-long sting operation, thousands of dollars of hidden surveillance tech, compromised. And now, a knock at the door. Two agents stood there, stern, unblinking. One of them, Agent Colton Reeve, simply asked, "Where's the vehicle, Mr. Lawson?" I had to say it out loud. It was stolen. By my HOA president. This wasn't supposed to be how life in Pinebrook Meadows went. After 20 years in the Air Force and too many cities to count, I'd come here for quiet. A yard for my dog. A garage to rebuild motorcycles. For the first few weeks, it felt like I'd found it. Neighbors waved. The air smelled like barbecue. Kids played ball in the street. But peace has one fatal flaw. It can't survive Cheryl Whitmore. She wasn't just the HOA president. She was the HOA. A petty tyrant with a clipboard and a god complex. One blade of grass out of place, and you'd find a citation taped to your door by sunrise. And if you drove something like my tactical SUV, military plates, blackout coating, reinforced bumpers, well, you might as well have parked a tank on her lawn. The first time Cheryl saw my SUV, she winced like I'd insulted her personally. "That doesn't belong here," she sneered. "Looks like it came straight from a demolition derby." I explained, as calmly as possible, that the vehicle was part of a federal surveillance contract. She smiled and said, "Sure, soldier boy. Maybe next time you drive a Honda like a civilized person." From then on, it was war. Weekly complaints arrived, unauthorized military styling, visual intimidation, even tactical aggression. Yes, apparently a parked vehicle could wage psychological warfare. What Cheryl didn't know, what she never bothered to ask, was that the SUV had been handpicked by a federal task force to blend into this neighborhood. Outfitted with encrypted drives, satellite uplinks, and covert cameras, it was the perfect camouflage. Her hatred for it was exactly why it worked. I followed protocol to the letter, kept it parked, rotated it slightly every few days, never touched it without clearance. I even added a heavy-duty wheel lock. That lock, it must have pushed Cheryl right over the edge. Because sometime during the night, she cut the lock, called in a sketchy tow company, and vanished my vehicle without a trace. All under the twisted belief she was restoring community standards. Except she didn't just move a car. She set off a federal investigation. And at 3:17 a.m., I realized something horrifying. This wasn't over. It was just getting started. Cheryl Whitmore didn't just dislike my Humvee-style SUV, she was obsessed. Over the span of 3 weeks, she reported it 5 separate times to the Pinebrook Meadows HOA, each complaint escalating. First it was unsightly, then militarized, and eventually she labeled it abandoned. No matter how many times I explained, no matter that it was legally parked on my own property, Cheryl insisted she had a right, a duty, to remove hazards from the neighborhood. Then, one afternoon while I was out running errands, she acted. According to Marty Dunham, my neighbor and part-time porch watchdog with a 24/7 Ring camera, Cheryl arrived in broad daylight, clip-clopping down the sidewalk in wedges and power-tripping like a cartoon villain. In her hand, a pair of oversized bolt cutters. She marched straight up to the SUV, didn't hesitate, and snapped the lock clean off like she was breaking into a military vault. Marty caught everything. In the footage, she even smirked at the camera and muttered, "One less eyesore to worry about." Then a nondescript tow truck rolled up. No company name, no license markings. They hooked up the SUV and were gone in under 10 minutes. When I returned home and saw the empty spot where my vehicle had been, my first thought was theft. Then I saw it. The cone, the note. Code violation, HOA confiscated. I froze. At first, I laughed at the absurdity of it. Cheryl had no idea that the SUV she'd just removed was not some over-the-top off-roader. It was a surveillance unit, retrofitted with government intel tech and assigned to a federal task force targeting a drug ring operating near Crestview Hills. Then the panic hit. I immediately called Agent Colton Reeve, our point of contact with the Federal Surveillance Division. He didn't laugh. Within 30 minutes, 2 unmarked vehicles were at my curb. Colton stood at my door with clenched fists and a face that had gone pale. "She cut the lock?" he asked. I nodded. "She towed the vehicle without authorization?" Another nod. "That SUV was active. That's tampering with federal surveillance equipment. Obstruction minimum." The tone in the room shifted instantly. Frustration turned into fury. Colton issued an emergency retrieval order, but the situation got worse. The SUV wasn't at any authorized tow yard. None of the city lots had it on record. That meant Cheryl had taken it somewhere private. Off books. Possibly illegal. Meanwhile, the operation that SUV had been monitoring? Cancelled. Our suspects had gotten spooked. Months of intel gathering, surveillance patterns, case building, all lost. Dismantled by a neighborhood dictator who didn't like the way a vehicle looked. That's how I found myself standing outside at 3:17 a.m. again. Only this time, watching the task force deploy without its mobile unit, suspects on the run, and Cheryl nowhere to be found. She had no idea what she'd just done. But karma doesn't wait long. The next morning, I got a text from Colton. "We found the SUV. You're going to want to see this." My stomach flipped. I barely had time to throw on a hoodie before he pulled up in a black SUV, didn't say a word, just motioned for me to get in. We drove for about 10 minutes down back roads I'd never noticed before, eventually stopping near a rusted gate tucked behind the HOA's maintenance shed. Colton stepped out and pointed to a keypad with a broken padlock dangling off it. "She wasn't even subtle," he muttered. Inside was a fenced-off lot, overgrown with weeds, surrounded by bent chain-link fencing. Scattered around were cones, tarps, and 3 other vehicles, each looking equally neglected. Stickers had been scraped off, tickets fluttered under cracked wipers. And there it was. My SUV. Scratched. Mud-smeared. The driver's side mirror cracked. It sat crooked, like it had been dumped in a hurry. I walked around it, heart in my throat. The small black case containing the encrypted surveillance drive? Ripped open. Empty. Colton swore under his breath and started snapping photos. "This isn't a tow lot," he said, kicking aside a cone. "This is a private impound lot. She's been running her own damn repo yard." Every scratch, every dent, told a story. Someone had tried to pry open the glove box. Mud was caked deep in the undercarriage. The cameras? Gone. This wasn't just a violation. It was desecration. And Cheryl Whitmore? She had no idea that her little act of visual cleanup had just triggered a federal incident. But she was about to find out. It was like watching someone desecrate a tombstone. As I stared at my gutted SUV, its encrypted storage case cracked open, its glove box pried with what looked like a screwdriver. Agent Colton Reeve stepped aside and radioed for backup. He requested a full federal evidence team to come secure the vehicle. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Then, as if summoned by the sheer force of our collective outrage, Cheryl Whitmore arrived. Her heels clacked across the gravel like she was walking into a garden brunch, not an active crime scene. With that familiar smug grin plastered on her face, she tilted her head and chirped, "Oh good. You found it. I was about to notify you, but I assumed you knew the HOA had every right to." "Ma'am." Colton cut her off. "Step away from the vehicle." Cheryl blinked, caught off guard by the sudden tone shift. "Excuse me? I'm the HOA president. I have full authority to remove any unauthorized or unregistered vehicle in this community." Colton's voice dropped. "That vehicle is federal surveillance property. It was part of an active sting operation. Do you understand how serious this is?" She stared at him, eyes narrowing into disbelief. "You can't be serious. That thing was a visual nuisance. It was parked in the same spot for a week, locked up like some abandoned military toy. Honestly, I did you all a favor." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She sounded like she expected a thank you for interfering with federal law enforcement. Colton gave a sharp nod to another agent, who moved in and politely, but firmly, began escorting Cheryl away. She didn't go quietly. As they walked her toward a black SUV, she shouted about how she had saved the neighborhood from an eyesore and had the courage to act where others were too weak. Every word was digging her deeper. As the federal team swarmed around my SUV documenting the scene, Colton turned to me and asked if I had any footage of the moment the vehicle was taken. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and opened the ring cam video Marty Dunham had given me. There she was, Cheryl, in broad daylight, walking confidently toward the SUV with a pair of bolt cutters like she was about to free a prisoner. She snipped through the lock like it was made of twine. Moments later, an unmarked, sketchy-looking tow truck rolled up. No logos. No official paperwork. The driver barely looked legal. She laughed, as the SUV was dragged away. That sound was going to haunt her. With the footage, the timeline, and now a discovered illegal impound lot, the task force had everything they needed. It wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was a rogue operation hidden behind the mask of HOA enforcement, and Cheryl had orchestrated the entire thing. Just when I thought the day couldn't get more surreal, Marty strolled over, unfolding a lawn chair and cracking open a soda like he was watching Sunday football. So, he said with a grin, you gonna tell her she messed with the feds, or should I drop the footage in the Pinebrook Facebook group? Turns out, Marty had been collecting receipts for months. Every letter Cheryl sent, every unhinged HOA meeting, every post where she bragged about cleaning up junk vehicles from the streets. He had screenshots, videos, and even printed PDFs. He handed them over like he was donating a national archive. I always knew she'd go nuclear, he said, shaking his head. Just didn't think it'd happen over a government SUV. The most shocking part? The rest of the HOA had no idea any of this had taken place. Cheryl had acted completely on her own. No vote, no paperwork, no official record. Just raw, unfiltered power tripping. When word spread through the community, the reactions ranged from stunned disbelief to gleeful schadenfreude. One neighbor brought out cupcakes decorated like tiny tow trucks with red and blue frosting. That evening, Special Investigator Naomi Pierce called me directly. She didn't waste time. We're reviewing the charges, she said. Tampering with federal property. Interfering with a surveillance operation. Obstruction of justice. Her HOA title doesn't protect her. I asked, what happens next? We finish processing the damage, she replied. Then we take it to the district attorney. In the meantime, you might want to brace yourself. People like Cheryl don't go quietly. Prepare for the fallout. People like her don't go down quietly. Special Investigator Naomi Pierce wasn't exaggerating. The next morning, a thickly worded notice was taped to every front door in Pinebrook Meadows. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an explanation. No, Cheryl Whitmore had called an emergency HOA meeting, not to take responsibility, but to justify herself. According to the letter, she intended to clarify her actions in light of recent misunderstandings regarding community safety and possible government overreach. I had to reread it twice. The gall. She was actually going to spin the whole thing like she was the victim. She hadn't even seen half the evidence yet. But I knew. This wasn't going to be a normal HOA meeting. Cheryl wasn't going to be holding the gavel this time. She'd be sitting squarely in the hot seat. And this time, it wouldn't be just cupcakes and irritated neighbors. There would be lawyers, officers, and subpoenas, lots of subpoenas. The meeting was set for Friday evening at the Pinebrook Community Center. By 6:45 p.m., the place was packed wall to wall. Residents stood shoulder to shoulder. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras quietly rolling. Legal observers filled the aisle seats. And a cluster of serious-looking men and women in dark suits stood near the back, definitely not there for free cookies. Tension buzzed like static. At 7:15 sharp, Cheryl entered the room. Late, of course. She wore a bright red blazer like she was hosting a talk show instead of standing on the edge of a legal cliff. Clipboard in hand. Lipstick fresh. Her smirk? Unshaken. She marched confidently to the front, gave a perfunctory nod to the board members behind the table, and tapped the microphone twice like she was prepping for a TED Talk. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, she began, voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I want to address the recent incident involving the removal of an illegally parked, unregistered vehicle from our street. There has been a great deal of confusion, misinformation, and frankly, hysteria. Someone near the back let out a loud snort. I didn't have to look. I knew it was Marty Dunham. But Cheryl pressed on, unfazed. As your HOA president, I take our neighborhood's safety and aesthetic standards very seriously. When I saw a clearly abandoned, unsightly SUV parked for days on end, chained and unmoved, I followed the appropriate process to have it removed. I had no knowledge of any covert operations, nor was I informed that the vehicle belonged to any federal agency. Frankly, I believe I was misled. That was my cue. I stood up slowly and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Misled? Cheryl, you cut the lock off a federal vehicle. You had it towed without authorization, and then you bragged about it on Facebook." Gasps. Murmurs. Cheryl's face flushed. But I didn't stop. I walked up front and handed a small USB drive to the IT technician, who had clearly been waiting for this moment. The projector screen flickered to life. First came the ring cam footage. Cheryl sauntering up with bolt cutters, snapping the lock, gesturing triumphantly to the tow truck. Then came the screenshots. Her Facebook post mocking military cosplay. The comment where she wrote, "Sometimes you have to break the rules to keep the streets clean." Silence. Elliot Crane, one of the board members, looked like he might melt into his chair. He leaned toward the person next to him and whispered something. Cheryl stood frozen, her smile fading like cheap paint in the rain. She tried to recover. Okay, so perhaps I was misinformed about the ownership. But the vehicle clearly violated HOA standards, and the bylaws give me the authority. "No, they don't," said a sharp voice from the side. Everyone turned. Naomi Pierce stepped forward, holding a thick file of documents. Calm, poised, deadly. "We've reviewed the HOA charter, the bylaws, and the procedures. Not only did you bypass the board," she said, locking eyes with Cheryl, "you failed to notify any city or law enforcement agencies, used an unlicensed tow company, and relocated federal property to an unauthorized storage site. You've been acting without community consent, and your actions compromised an active investigation." Another wave of gasps rolled through the crowd. Cheryl looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. For the first time in months, she had nothing to say. And the walls? They were finally closing in. Suburbia's most dangerous tyrant. That's what one viral Twitter thread called her. By then, Cheryl Whitmore had already lost control of the room. But Special Investigator Naomi Pierce wasn't done. She stepped forward, calm but razor-sharp. "Furthermore," she said, "the property in question was part of a sanctioned joint task force operation. Your actions compromised months of surveillance, damaged sensitive equipment, and forced the premature termination of an active case." Another wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cheryl's face twitched. She glanced toward the HOA board, as if hoping for backup. But they all leaned away, like passengers trying to avoid getting splashed on a sinking ship. Then Elliot Crane, the board's reluctant treasurer, stood up and cleared his throat. "I'd like to make a motion to suspend Cheryl Whitmore from her position as HOA president," he said, "pending an internal investigation and legal review." Before Cheryl could even form a response, another board member raised their hand and added, "Seconded." A third muttered, "All in favor?" A unanimous chorus of "aye" filled the room. Cheryl's mouth dropped open. She looked completely blindsided, as if the idea that she could be held accountable had never once occurred to her. "You can't do this," she snapped. Her voice was high, defensive. "This is a power grab. I built this HOA. I've served Pinebrook Meadows for 6 years. And destroyed it in one afternoon," I said, stepping beside Naomi. Cheryl fumbled through her clipboard like it held the key to her salvation. Then, in one final Hail Mary move, she pulled out a piece of paper and held it aloft like a courtroom drama prop. "This," she barked, "is a cease and desist order filed by my attorney against the local police department and Mr. Lawson for entrapment, defamation, and emotional distress. You'll all be hearing from my legal team very soon." Naomi stepped forward, took the letter, glanced at it, and calmly handed it back. "Brandon Hale," she said dryly. "We're familiar with him. He's currently under investigation in 3 separate HOA-related misconduct cases. Good luck with that." That was the moment Cheryl realized she was alone. Even her most loyal allies, those who had stood behind her during her war on lawn ornaments and mailbox colors, sat stone-faced in silence. Marty Dunham, seated near the back, leaned over and whispered, "Ding dong. The witch is cooked." Cheryl stormed out, but not before shouting over her shoulder, "You haven't heard the last of this." The moment she left, the tension shattered. People exhaled for the first time all night. A few clapped. Then more joined in. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet, applauding, not for vengeance, but for relief. Naomi leaned toward me and said, "We'll be forwarding the case to the district attorney. She won't be walking away from this clean. Even if the federal charges don't stick, there's more than enough here." I nodded slowly, still trying to wrap my head around everything. For months, Cheryl had treated Pinebrook Meadows like her personal kingdom. One act of arrogant overreach, cutting a lock and towing my SUV, had brought it all crashing down. As the meeting wrapped up, I noticed Elliot lingering by the door. He walked over, scratching his head. "Hey, listen," he said awkwardly. "I'm sorry about all this. We were afraid to stand up to her. She threatened to fine me once for having an American flag on my porch." "It's okay," I told him. Fear was her real weapon. But once it's gone, she's got nothing. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept like a rock. No sirens. No late-night emails about garage paint colors. Just silence. But I knew we weren't done. Cheryl still had lawyers. She wasn't the type to fade quietly. Still, she was off the throne. And for the first time in years, Pinebrook Meadows could finally breathe. Within 48 hours, everything went nuclear online. Marty uploaded the Ring cam footage to Reddit, captioned, "HOA Karen cuts lock to impound my neighbor's SUV. Didn't realize it belonged to the feds." It hit the front page in 2 hours. By lunch, the video had over 2 million views. And by nightfall, Cheryl's face was plastered across TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter. She had wanted attention. Now she had it. And it wasn't going away anytime soon. News vans started rolling into Pinebrook Meadows like it was ground zero for HOA warfare. It was surreal. People actually drove in from other towns just to take selfies in front of the now infamous dark green Humvee-style SUV, the same one Agent Colton Reeve and his team had returned to me, scratched, dented, but somehow still proud. The funny part? What Cheryl once called a visual nuisance had become a local legend. Someone even started a parody GoFundMe called Save the Tactical Jeep. The whole thing was meant as a joke, but people donated anyway. Enough, in fact, to give the SUV a fresh coat of paint. I chose matte black, fitting for a vehicle that had unintentionally become the rolling symbol of Cheryl Whitmore's downfall. But behind the memes and laughter, the truth remained. This was never just about a vehicle. The surveillance gear inside had been destroyed. A joint federal operation was compromised. And while Cheryl had been suspended from her HOA throne, she wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Just days after the emergency meeting, she reappeared, with all the grace of a wrecking ball. Wearing a wrinkled gray suit and wild determination in her eyes, she held a press conference outside the Crestview Hills courthouse. No one had invited her. No one asked for statements. But there she stood, flanked by her new attorney, Brandon Hale, the same slimeball Naomi Pierce had warned me about. Hale looked like a caricature, slick back hair, gold watch too big for his wrist, oversized sunglasses indoors. He grinned like a man who once sued a coffee shop for emotional turbulence. And with a straight face, he claimed Cheryl was the victim. According to him, the police failed to label the SUV as federal property. I had enticed Cheryl by parking a vehicle in plain view with a lock on it. The HOA bylaws, he said, gave her immunity from any legal consequences. It was so ridiculous. Even the news anchor covering it laughed halfway through her broadcast. But the legal backlash came fast and furious. The district attorney's office filed formal charges: unauthorized towing, destruction of property, obstruction of an investigation, tampering with surveillance equipment. The feds hadn't charged her yet, but they issued a blistering statement. The HOA's actions, they wrote, had compromised a sensitive federal operation with national implications. They demanded full cooperation and internal reform. The board, still reeling, issued a public apology. Then Elliot Crane, now acting president, did the one thing no one expected. He abolished Cheryl's infamous violation committee. The same committee that used to fine people for garden gnomes and mailbox paint. People clapped in the street. I mean literally. Like it was the 4th of July. But Cheryl? She doubled down. Her lawyer filed a countersuit against the HOA, the city, the police department, and somehow me. Her legal argument? That by parking a federally equipped surveillance vehicle on my own property and securing it, I had lured her into committing a crime. The judge took one look at the motion and laughed it out of court. Even the courtroom clerk reportedly snorted. But Cheryl's reputation had already taken the real blow, because that's when the internet took over. Meme accounts had a field day. One had her face photoshopped into a grand theft auto loading screen, bolt cutters in hand, with the caption, "Mission failed. Federal charges incoming." Another turned her courthouse rant into a rap remix. I didn't know it was federal, auto-tuned with trap beats and fire emojis. TikTok creators reenacted the Ring footage with dramatic lighting, slow-motion effects, and even cosplay. Cheryl had wanted power, control, and recognition. She got all three, but not the way she planned. Her name became synonymous with HOA tyranny. Teenagers who didn't even live in HOA neighborhoods started calling their strict parents Cheryl Whitmores. And yet, something beautiful happened amid the chaos. The community loosened up. Neighbors talked more, laughed again. Flags were hung, porches filled with lawn chairs, kids drew murals on sidewalks with chalk, and no one got fined for it. For the first time since I'd moved to Pinebrook Meadows, it felt like a neighborhood, not a mini dictatorship. And Marty? Ever the opportunist, he launched a website, HOAwatchdog.net. With help from a few neighbors, Marty Dunham turned his archive of screenshots, HOA notices, and Ring cam footage into a full-blown digital library. His website, HOAwatchdog.net, quickly gained traction. At first, it was a resource for residents dealing with overreaching HOAs. But once Marty uploaded a full timeline of the SUV incident, complete with video evidence, legal documents, and a merch tab featuring Team Jeep mugs and t-shirts with Cheryl Whitmore's infamous code violation note printed on the back, the site went viral. As for the SUV itself, the task force eventually replaced all the damaged surveillance equipment. To my surprise, Agent Colton Reeve called it a token of appreciation and handed me the newest model, a reinforced beast with blackout panels, encrypted uplinks, and tactical upgrades I wasn't even allowed to ask about. "You earned it," Colton said. It didn't erase the sting of the Sting operation collapsing, but when I rolled that upgraded Humvee into the driveway, I couldn't help but grin. Cheryl hated the old one. This new model? It looked like it belonged on a battlefield. Just for fun, Marty helped me paint a custom plate under the rear bumper. Number 001, Neighborhood Watchdog. But the real twist came a week later. Elliot Crane showed up at my porch with a manila envelope in hand. He looked exhausted but relieved. "She's done," he said quietly, handing it over. Audit results. Insurance flagged it. The HOA's insurance provider had run an internal audit, and what they uncovered was damning. Cheryl had been misusing funds for years, charging towing fees, private contractor payments, even printer ink for her personal home office, all under vague budget lines like administrative recovery. Thousands of dollars. No board approval. No oversight. The report had already been sent to the authorities. Another investigation was underway, this time for embezzlement. I asked Elliot what would happen if the HOA got dissolved. He gave a tired shrug. Maybe we just go back to being neighbors. And as simple as that sounded, it hit harder than I expected. One woman's obsession with power had mutated into a system that let her reign unchecked. And in the end, it all fell apart because she cut the wrong lock. That evening, I parked the new SUV exactly where the old one had sat, front and center, full tactical display. A few neighborhood kids rode by on their bikes and gave me a thumbs up. I saluted them back. Cheryl Whitmore hadn't been seen since her last public meltdown. Her house was dark. Her lawyer stopped returning calls. Rumor had it she was trying to sell, but no one wanted the infamous HOA house of Pinebrook Meadows, the place where a woman went to war with a vehicle and lost to the internet. Justice had come, not just in subpoenas and legal briefs, but in memes, community solidarity, and one very stubborn SUV. And then, the final curtain dropped. It was a warm Saturday morning. The kind of calm day where you feel like something big's about to happen. I was sipping coffee on the porch, scrolling through the latest Cheryl memes, when I saw them. 3 black SUVs, 1 unmarked sedan, and 2 uniformed U.S. Marshals stepping out like they were arriving on a movie set. They moved with deliberate purpose, knocked once on Cheryl's door, then waited exactly 30 seconds. No response. They didn't waste time. A locksmith was already with them, and within minutes, the door swung open. A few neighbors watched from behind blinds. Others came outside, no shame, popcorn in hand. It was happening. The arrest warrant had been signed. Cheryl finally appeared in the doorway, her hair disheveled, her signature red blazer wrinkled like she'd been sleeping in it for days. She clutched a manila folder like it could somehow save her. But it was over. Her hands were cuffed in front. Her posture? No longer proud, just stunned. The disbelief on her face said it all. She still thought this was just a misunderstanding. A bureaucratic hiccup. Not the national disgrace it had become. But the marshals didn't flinch. And neither did the neighborhood. As the SUV doors closed behind her, a few folks clapped. One neighbor lit a leftover sparkler from the 4th of July. Marty livestreamed the moment with the caption, "The Queen of Citations has officially been cited." It was poetic. And just like that, the woman who ruled the cul-de-sac with fines and fear became a footnote in a viral cautionary tale. But it didn't happen all at once. What started as a petty power play had somehow spiraled into national humiliation and multiple felony charges. But this wasn't a one-time mistake. It was 100 small, entitled decisions, stacked one on top of the other, until Cheryl Whitmore crossed a line she couldn't uncross. When the marshals pulled away with her in custody, something amazing happened. A loud, spontaneous cheer broke out across Pinebrook Meadows. No one had planned it, but the neighborhood erupted anyway. People clapped. A few neighbors honked their horns. And Marty Dunham, always ready with a surprise, lit 2 leftover fireworks from the 4th of July and let them spark into the sky. Later that afternoon, Special Investigator Naomi Pierce stopped by my porch. She was no longer in formal attire, just jeans and a windbreaker, but still sharp as ever. She handed me a printed charge sheet. "Final charges," she said. "Obstruction of justice. Tampering with government property. Operating an unlicensed towing operation. Misuse of HOA funds. And suspected embezzlement." It read less like a legal document and more like the plot of a political thriller. But legal trouble was only half the story. Cheryl hadn't just ruined herself. She'd cratered the entire HOA. Half the board had resigned within 48 hours. The remaining members, realizing a class action lawsuit from the residents was all but guaranteed, voted to dissolve the HOA altogether. With no board and no legal authority, the bylaws Cheryl once weaponized like holy scripture were now nothing but shredded paper in a dusty binder. Elliot Crane, who oversaw the final transition, admitted what most were thinking. "Honestly," he said, "people are just relieved. No more fines. No more letters. No more threats." And he was right. The neighborhood began to breathe again. The passive-aggressive notices stopped. People planted wildflowers instead of HOA-approved shrubs. Kids drew chalk murals on the sidewalks. Mailboxes turned from regulation beige to a rainbow of color, and no one cared. For the first time in years, Pinebrook Meadows felt like a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. Then, in a gesture I didn't expect, the residents surprised me. They pooled money and commissioned a custom cast-iron sign. It read, "Reserved for tactical eyesore." We bolted it into the curb where my SUV always parked. It became a local landmark. Even the mailman stopped to take a picture with it. But the biggest surprise came the following weekend. Agent Colton Reeve and Naomi Pierce returned, this time in plain clothes, wide grins on their faces, and holding a giant set of keys. They led me to the back of my house. There, behind a privacy fence and a row of hedges, stood the old HOA maintenance garage, once Cheryl's illegal impound lot. The city auctioned it off after the investigation, Colton explained. "We bought it, quietly, on behalf of the task force. But we don't need it. We thought you should have it." I stared at him. "You're serious?" I asked. He handed me the deed, signed, sealed, notarized. "If anyone deserves to decide what gets parked here," he said, "it's the guy who had his Humvee stolen by the HOA during a federal sting." I had to sit down just to process it. The irony was almost poetic. The very place Cheryl dragged my SUV without permission? It was mine now. Legally. Forever. I decided to turn it into something useful. We cleared it out. Painted the walls. Added workbenches, a mini repair bay, and a pegboard covered in donated tools. Veterans came to tinker with old bikes. Teenagers learned how to change spark plugs. We called it the garage. No permits. No fines. No permission slips. And to christen the new space? The task force had one last surprise. A week later, the entire block was lined with Jeeps, civilian, military, vintage, and custom. Veterans from around the county showed up. Officers from Colton's department arrived in convoy. We led a slow, rumbling honking parade through the neighborhood. Kids waved flags. Parents cheered from porches. Marty livestreamed the whole thing, and it went viral, again. At the front of the convoy was my Humvee, polished and tactical. Across the hood, stenciled in bold letters, it read, Community Watchdog. The parade ended at the garage, where Naomi handed me a plaque. It read, In appreciation for keeping your cool when your HOA went full villain. Everyone laughed, but the meaning behind it hit deep. This could have gone sideways. It could have turned toxic, violent, or quietly buried. Instead, it became something better, a reminder that standing up to petty tyranny matters. That community isn't built on fear. It's built on trust, and yes, sometimes, shared frustration over stupid rules. Cheryl eventually took a plea deal. No jail time. But she was ordered to pay restitution to the HOA, fined by the state, and banned from serving on any board for the next 20 years. She sold her house quietly, left in the dead of night. No one said goodbye. No one noticed. In the months that followed, Pinebrook Meadows flourished. We held barbecues, planted trees. Someone hung a banner across the entry gate that read, Welcome to Eyesore Estates. It stuck, and we loved it. The sign stayed. The SUV stayed. And Cheryl? She became a cautionary tale, a local legend, proof that power without empathy leads nowhere good. Looking back, it's hard to believe it all unraveled over a parked vehicle. But maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes, it doesn't take a scandal. Just one person who thinks they're above the rules. Cheryl thought she was protecting the neighborhood. But the truth? She was the one threatening it all along. Now, every time I start up the Humvee and hear that engine growl, I smile. Because it's not just a vehicle anymore. It's a victory, a symbol, and one hell of a story, one I'll be telling for years.